But I'm not Reformed. I don't believe you had to reform a Baptist church, period, or reform their doctrine. That refers back to Catholicism, and when people were coming out of Catholicism, the Reformation. Baptists predated the Reformation. So when we talk about the word church, when I'm going to begin, I'm going to start with Matthew chapter 4. And guess where Protestants will begin when they want to talk about the beginning of the church? They'll take you over to Acts chapter 2. Well, that's the empowering of the church, but that's not when it got started. So where do most people, when they want to look at, well, we want to study the church, so we're going to study the book of Acts. Hey, why don't you go back into the Gospels and study the church there? That's where the church originated. That's where the activities and stuff happened. So let's read. And Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brethren, Simon called Peter, and Andrew his brother, casting a net in the sea, for they were fishers. And he saith unto them, Follow me. Who were they? What were they? What was going on with their life already? They're not just guys hanging out fishing. They're already disciples of John the Baptist. Understand that. And he said to them, Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And straightway they left their nets and followed him. And going on from thence, he saw two other brethren, James the son of Zebedee, and John his brother, in a ship with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. And he called them. Called out. Hey, just again, and they immediately left their ship and their father and followed him. Now, to me, in this text, I'm just going to point out, and I've already done this on a Wednesday night lesson. It's almost the same material, but again, I want to reemphasize this. One of these days, I'm not going to be here. And whether or not you follow this, it's not going to be because I didn't teach it to you. It's, to me, rather obvious, the definition of a church. It's a very simple, living example of the biblical definition of a gospel church. And it is consistent with the ancient articles of faith and the teaching of Baptists who believe as I do. This is not a new concept, but it comes directly from God's word and has been traced and taught through the centuries. Be aware this is peculiar to Baptists and usually to a particular brand of Baptist. There are a lot of various opinions. From this specific text, you can see when we looked at it, James, Andrew, Peter, and so on, all of them were already believers. Okay, we know that for a fact. So you should understand that they were believers, and guess what? They were already baptized. How did that happen? Well, they came and they professed a faith in a coming Messiah that John had been talking about, and they submitted to scriptural baptism. In fact, Acts talks about the fact when they were getting ready to make a replacement of Judas, they said, we've got to go all the way back to John's baptism. That's who we need to get, somebody who was baptized by John and was right there from the very beginning. They were believers, they were baptized, they were gathered or called out, they were committed because they followed him, and they were commissioned. You'll see that a little bit later. So what do we have right there? Believers, baptized, gathered, committed, and commissioned. That's what is a definition of a New Testament church. Now, I want to deal with these facts and prove each of these points throughout our study. So, again, this is not called a church in this passage, but it fits the very definition. In a short time, they will grow, they will become discipled, and they will disciple. They will be given order and ordinances. Much later, Pentecost, they will be empowered. But throughout that whole time, they're going to be perpetuated as well as persecuted. Now, there are various concepts or perceptions of a gospel church. Several definitions of a church exist among Christians and Christian organizations. Sometimes people call an ornate building a church. Some see it as a group of people, but only people who are dedicated to social change. Others may have the perception that a gospel church is a religious organization of bishops or priests or some distinct ecclesiastical hierarchy with both form and function, and of course, you got to have that occasional pomp and circumstance. Others see that a church is more simple, more refined. Some see a church as a singing, praying, lifting your hands or heart to the Lord, and others do the same. In other words, the worship, that's church. Many, sometimes, because of cultural upbringing, has taught someone that a gospel church is a place of quiet meditation. It's a place of soul searching or a place of exuberance or proclamation. There are others who hold no such views at all, but see the church as just simply everyone who is saved. Everyone who is born again. And you'll hear it time and time again when they use the terminology church, the church, the church. And they're speaking about what I would call the family of God. Everybody that's saved. Whatever your perceptions might be, I want you to listen to these words and pay attention to them and understand that you are within your rights to accept or reject anything that I say. That's your liberty. But you are also going to be held accountable. You've heard the truth. Now what will you do with it? So let's look at this word church. And first of all, I'm going to look at it the first time that it's ever used is in Matthew 16 and 18, where he says, "And I say also unto thee, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Now, it's interesting that, again, we're going to look at that word, and you see it now. Instead of using the word church, it's the word ecclesia. That's the word. And so it's really important to understand what that word means. He, in fact, chose a word. This is Jesus talking. He chose a word that would allow him to communicate accurately. Can you imagine the Lord using a word with ambiguity? They wouldn't know what he meant? No. It communicated accurately and decidedly what the apostles and early disciples needed to understand about his church or assembly. It was a word that had a very distinct and a very definite meaning to it. In fact, J.P. Boyce, in writing about the ecclesia, said this. He says, "It is of the utmost importance, therefore, to doctrine what its classical meaning and what modifications this word were affected by its use in the Septuagint." In fact, he went on to write this. He said that if it didn't mean anything, he says that then it would convey no idea to their readers or a wrong one. That's why, again, when I say the word church, we're going to have the Lord's Supper at the end of this month. We'll have maybe visitors. They do not understand. They think they are a part of the church. So therefore, they are entitled to the Lord's Supper. And for us to exclude them is offensive. But in fact, the Lord's Supper belongs to the ordinance of a local New Testament church. And we are to monitor our members. You must, to observe the Lord's Supper with us, you must be a member. And qualification on top of that, you must be a member in good standing. Hear that? Now, who knows the members here as to whether they're members and members in good standing? Only we do. We evaluate that. You have a visitor walk in, you may even know them, but we don't know what their standing is wherever they're at. We don't really know whether they're saved. We know the people that are here profess to be saved. Period. Plain and simple. If you look in your own dictionary, you will find there are, at least the last time I looked, around 15 different meanings given to the English word church. Merriam-Webster's online narrows it down to 5 different meanings. Current use in the English language and literature really is no help at all in ascertaining a sound or proper definition. And we mess it up all the time. Probably some of us said before we were leaving, come on, hurry up, we got to get to church. Anybody say that? You don't have to raise your hand. Come on, we're going to church today. No, you are the church. You're going to worship with the other members of the church. But we get lazy in our language, and we have been really infiltrated with Protestant theology, even in our common conversations. In our contrast of old articles of faith and Baptist writings, though worded differently, they all agree with one another, and they do not allow for more than one definition or meaning of the word church. It is and listen to this, it is a visible congregation or assembly that has qualifications and ownership or authorship. It is the Lord's assembly. When I say authorship and ownership, we're talking about it is the Lord's assembly. It's not your assembly. It's not the pastor's assembly. It was established by the Lord Jesus Christ during his personal ministry, as we already saw in our first verse or second verse in Matthew chapter 16. And it will help us to a great deal to look at the original word that Christ and the apostles used as they began to teach and preach. When we look at, first of all, let me give you a little bit about the classical use of the word ecclesia. Again, remember, this is not a foreign word. It is to us, ecclesia, but it's made up from 2 different Greek words, the Greek word ek and kaleo, or called out. And that's exactly, if you notice, what Christ did when he was walking along the seashore. He called out Simon. He called out James. He gathered them together. He commissioned them. He ordered them. He organized them. When we begin to look at the classical use, it really will enlarge our understanding of the word, but it will also narrow its concept. A lot of times now today, because people are really forced, especially Protestants are forced to see that the church is local. So what they will do is they say, okay, there's a local church, but there's also a universal church. No, there's only a local church. There is a way in which you'll see universal, but we'll get into that a little bit later. If you look at the classical Greek of the word ecclesia, it had a direct application to a legal or a lawful body during that particular time. R.C. Trench said this: it was a body that was possessed with the rights of citizenship for the transaction of public affairs. So think of it in political terms, first of all. Governmental terms, cultural terms. The word church had to do with a body of people who had the right of citizenship, who could carry out the transaction of public affairs. We're going to get muddled and muddy in that very thing if we're not careful with our own country. There is a point where it is supposed to be citizens who vote to conduct our affairs within our rights of our citizenship. But when you start giving people that are no longer citizens the right to vote, well, they're here, they should have a right to vote. Well, again, culturally, you'll begin to see it's not a political issue to me. This is a matter of understanding what the word was even then. We have another definition that's given by Liddell and Scott, which is a Greek and English translation or work, and he says that it is, they do, I should say, an assembly of citizens summoned by the crier, the legislative body. And then we also see it, J.H. Thayer, again, another Greek work, an assembly of the people convene at the public place of council for the purpose of deliberating. In his manual of ecclesiology, and this is going to be long, so it's going to be at least 3 slides, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. This is by, and again, a manual of ecclesiology by E.H. Dana. This comes from pages 25 and 26, but he says, the ancient Greek people were organized into a number of city-states, that is, each large city and one smaller. And they had its own separate government and governed also the territory lying around it. The power of the government was vested in certain qualified citizens resident in the city who were called out for the legislative assemblies. This matter of qualification for citizenship was quite important, for many residents of such a city had no place in the ecclesia. In its bearing upon the New Testament idea of the church, the important significance of the classical usage is that the term referred to a body of persons having definite qualifications. Why do I say that? Believers, baptized, covenant together, all that's connected. They referred to a body of persons having definite qualifications assembled to carry out certain organized aims, carrying out the gospel for a church, on democratic principles. We vote. Everybody gets to participate. If you're a member of this church, you have a vote. Those democratic principles are important. It's what influenced the founding of our own country. To be more specific, there were in the classical usage of this term 4 elements pertinent to its New Testament meaning. The assembly was local, it was autonomous, it presupposed definite qualifications, and it was conducted on democratic principles. Now, grab hold of that because that's extremely important, those 4 points. Christ used a word that communicated a concept to his men, to his disciples. That word church had a definite meaning to it. B.H. Carroll, in his writing on the word ecclesia on page 47, in his appendix says the object of Christ's ecclesia and terms of membership in it were indeed different from those of the classic or Septuagint ecclesia. But the word retains its ordinary meaning. So they had an assembly, an ecclesia, or church, but it wasn't a New Testament church. It had different structure to it. And if you look, it talks about the word retains its ordinary meaning. I don't think I have any more yet. I do too. In determining this meaning, we look to the common literal usage. If occasionally we find it used in a general or figurative way, these few instances must be construed in harmony with the common literal signification. He goes on to write that the historical reading concerning the business assemblies of the several petty but independent self-governing Greek states with their lawful conference, their free speech, their decision by vote, whether of Spartans, Thracians, Sycosians, or Athenians, sounds much like the proceedings of particular and independent Baptist churches today. And here we're talking about him writing in the 1850s, 1860s. So understanding, you have different books that were written for the purpose of perpetuating and helping people to understand what a New Testament church. But literally, this is being lost. It's being lost across this country. It's being lost in Baptist churches. I'm going to have to quit here and not go any further than that because I wanted to get into the New Testament use of it. Let me give this last little bit. The Greek ecclesia consisted of certain individuals who, when assembled and organized, constituted an official body for the transaction of such business as might come before them. It was not merely an assembly. You can have assemblies all over the place, but it was an official assembly consisting of persons specifically qualified and who had each his specific rights and duties as a member of the ecclesia. Now, with that, when you begin to then get into the biblical use, we can begin to see that there are the words used throughout. And people will get confused. Well, hey, there's the church in the wilderness. So people will say, see, they were a church. Israel was a church. Well, yeah, they were, actually. That word, church, is the same word, ecclesia. But it's not a New Testament ecclesia. That's what you need. There was a Greek ecclesia, there's an Old Testament ecclesia, and there's a New Testament ecclesia. And they're not ordered or organized in the same way or under those same rules, but that word retains its same meaning. The church in the wilderness, he's talking about Israel. Were they one assembly? In fact, they were one huge assembly out in the wilderness, were they not? I got enough to go one more. Some therefore cried one thing and another, for the assembly, guess what word that is? Ecclesia. But it's not a New Testament ecclesia. It was an assembly that was gathered for the purpose there in Ephesus. They were confused, and the more part knew not why even they were come together. In this particular verse, the governing body of the city, not a cloud, or excuse me, a crowd, that's the word oklos, or even we could define it as a multitude. It was also a visible body. It was called out, but they were concerned for their orderliness or lawfulness, and later they were dismissed by the clerk. The word ecclesia retains the same meaning. Understand that? This word means the same thing. But it was not a New Testament ecclesia. It was a Greek political ecclesia, just like Israel had a Hebrew ecclesia, but not a New Testament church, and they weren't even called an Old Testament church, just an assembly. In Acts chapter 8, verse 1, Saul was consenting unto his death, and at that time there was a great persecution against the church. Well, is that all of the people that were saved everywhere? Well, notice he defines it. It's the ecclesia, but where is that ecclesia at? It had a location. It was the ecclesia at Jerusalem. It is a singular, visible ecclesia which Jesus built and was later scattered due to the persecution, all except for the apostles. In each of those definitions, every word, I should say, of those verses, the definition of the word does not change. That's important to understand. It doesn't change. I got a okay there. Brother, Tony, Noah, can you? There you go. Thank you, sir. It doesn't change. The only difference is the use or the application of the word, which shows the type of ecclesia which is in view. The gospel church is the Lord's church. Let me give you one other one. The churches of Asia. Now, again, that word is the word ecclesia, but it's plural. Now, if we could say, like the way people use it today, they talk about the church, or even the word church history. Ever heard that? That's really a common term. I would rather say Christian history, not church history, because there's a lot of Christians. But here we see the plural use, the churches of Asia. We'll pick back up there next time. I meant to stop, and we're already gone over a couple of minutes, but I pray that's been a blessing to you just to get